So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and this one is going to be on EDORAS, which I haven't actually gotten the opportunity to show for quite some time, and it's a shame because I do quite like EDORAS. And this one was sent to me actually by this player here, King Amar, although it's going to be from the perspective actually of Froggy, so I assume that King Amar's version of the replay didn't work, or he forgot to save it, whereas Froggy did save it. So thank you to those two players for making this replay possible. EDORAS in general is a little bit different to a lot of the other more traditional siege battles. It is a little bit more open, which does mean that the outer area of the defences can be a little bit more difficult to hold on to, which is perhaps why the defenders have elected to start a little bit further back, because obviously it can be quite difficult to hold on to the outer walls when so many of these can be opened up. And they can the walls of EDORAS can be brought down by rams as well, which is a pretty big distinction when you compare it to some of the more sort of heavily walled settlements. But the further back up the hill you go, the more difficult it could become for the attackers, because there are a lot less options. It turns into a few very distinct choke points, especially back here in the town centre, where the choke points get even narrower because of the palisade walls. There is another way into the town centre ever since WK updated the map, but even so, this is still not exactly the easiest approach with how thin it is, and also you're opening yourself up to all sorts of arrow fire on the approach down that road. But this does work both ways. The attackers are not immediately onto you when you're defending EDORAS, and there's a lot of open ground, which means, very fittingly, cavalry sally outs can be quite effective on EDORAS, although this time it looks as though with the three armies we see before us, there isn't going to be a cavalry sally out this time around. We'll go through, we'll look at the army from the perspective we're going to be watching this replay from. First of all, this is of course Froggy. He's going to be playing as Rudaur, and we don't see Rudaur an awful lot, which is a shame because I do like the idea of their playstyle and just their visual style as well. I do quite like. Like all the evil men factions, they can indulge in a little bit more of an orcish mentality, going for numbers, maybe a little bit more quantity over quality. Rudaur, in fact, perhaps more so than the others, maybe a little bit more akin to Harad. They have to bring a fair amount in terms of numbers, because while they do have quality units, they're not the sort of thing that you can fill your entire army with. Stuff like the Hranadine Berserkers, for example, are definitely a specialty unit, more of a niche, not like the sort of thing that Umbar can bring, or Rune like the Locoflagrim or the Castamir's Legion. But the Rudaur Swordsmen make up the bread and butter unit for Rudaur. Obviously, as far as sword and board units go, they have a decent amount of men per unit. They're not going to win any sort of prizes for quality, but they will get the job done, and provided you back them up with the appropriate units, they won't steer you far wrong. Back here we have some Rudaur Clansmen. Now the Rudaur Clansmen, I believe, they do have the armour upgrade. Now the Rudaur Clansmen have got very low attack values, I believe. I believe it's either 1 or 2 or 3 even. It's very low regardless, and with the Spear Malice, they're not really going to be very good at killing infantry. Obviously they have their cavalry bonus, but their main thing here is the fact that they can act as a decent tar pit, both in melee and at range with their big shields. They obviously have a large shield value. Obviously the armour upgrade certainly won't hurt them in that regard either. Quite a lot of men per unit, but their primary purpose is going to be either pushing through the lines or just staying alive for as long as possible in melee to allow some of Rudaur's more damage focused units, of which they have a lot, to do their work. Over here it looks as though we have some Dunman Hunters, obviously the cheap archers. We've gone through before why cheap archers are so good in this patch, so I won't rehash old ground. I'm trying to get away from that a little bit. But the Dunman Hunters obviously very orcish in sort of their style. Numbers, getting a bunch of volume down range as much as possible. Obviously individually they will be easy to take down, but that isn't the primary purpose for them. We've got another unit of Rudaur Swordsmen pushing another ram, and it looks as though Froggy is going to be trying to open up as many ways into EDORAS as possible, which is definitely the way to go. Another unit of Rudaur Swordsmen back here, and I would assume back here are going to be his stronger units. Indeed, he's got a couple of units here of Trollshaw Axe Throwers. They're pretty bad in melee, and also they are very vulnerable at range, but they're relatively cheap. Most Axe Thrower and Javelin units can be fairly expensive, but the Trollshaw Axe Throwers not so much, at least in comparison to certain other options other factions have. And the Trollshaw Axe Throwers, obviously, if they get into the right position and start really throwing their axes at a decent rate, they're going to be able to do a lot of damage to a compact formation, which it looks as though the defenders are going to try and go for. Got some Pyrannodine Rangers back here. Obviously, in a siege situation, Rangers, whether you're on the attack or defense, can be extremely potent in the late game. So we'll see how Froggy uses his Pyrannodine Rangers as the battle goes on. He does have a couple of units of Pyrannodine Berserkers over here, which are basically like the Trollshaw Axe Throwers, only they are good in melee as well. Now, you do pay for that. I believe they're still 1,000 florins, but they essentially are a unit of good quality shock infantry as far as melee goes, but they also add the ranged damage from their thrown axes as well. Not a lot of ammunition on them, but it's still enough to make them a pretty good hybrid unit. And then finally we have the Witch Realm Enslavers, which is going to be the General's Bodyguard unit. Obviously they are multiple HP shock units, which are relatively few and far between, to be honest with you. But obviously if there are armoured units in the defence, the Witch Realm Enslavers will do a very good job against them. Let's move on over to here, and we can see that General Issam Zadreni, I'm just going to call him Issam, I think, for the remainder of the fight, is going to be playing as Isengard. Isengard going for quite a lot of pikes. It looks as though he was actually expecting a cavalry sally out, which, considering it's EDORAS and considering that Dol Amroth and Linden are on the defence, it's not unreasonable to assume that, but it looks as though his tactical geometry, while very neatly laid out, is not going to be necessary here, so he can move forwards. Obviously a lot of Uruk-hai pikemen. If the fight gets grindy, whether they're just advancing up the hill or into the town centre, the Uruk-hai pikemen could prove to be a very useful tool indeed. Some Uruk-hai archers as well as some Uruk-hai crossbows, so both types of Uruk-hai skirmishes, Isengard skirmishes, are going to be available here. So obviously some long range pressure, and then in the late game the crossbows could be very, very effective, as we've seen in the past. Got some raiders over here, so just some basic Isengard infantry, as well as some Dunlending clansmen, more archers, some Uruk-hai infantry back here as well, without the armour upgrade, but they're still a very strong unit nonetheless. Lurtz hunting packs, that's another ranger unit that the attackers have available to them, as well as some berserkers to back them up. Half-orc spear guard, Uruk-hai infantry, and then finally we have the Nazkai, obviously extremely damaging, AP, all of the good stuff. Meanwhile, let's go and scoot right on over to the other side, and we have Umbar, Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud playing as them. Again, cheap archers individually of poor quality, but the attackers have got a lot of them. So the defenders do need to be somewhat careful, because if the attackers play this correctly, you know, they're going to be able to get good value off their archers, regardless of what the defenders try to do, especially with no cavalry to try and charge into them and try and thin out the attackers' archers' numbers a little bit. The Corsair archers obviously very much in the same vein as the Dunman hunters and the Uruk-hai archers as well. Corsair savages, now these guys, potentially a bit of a risk to bring in high numbers in this sort of situation. Obviously they are AP, good damage, not very much skill, but you know, most of the time they're going to be going after Dol Amroth and Khazad-dûm defensive lines. You would imagine that was the purpose they were brought in mind. But they don't have any armour value at all, so any archers that see them in range are going to be able to shred through them without any resistance. Got some Balagai halberds over here, so more AP. Back here we've got some Abrazani Nadu Bawi, which again, that's more of a skirmish presence from Umbar, which in terms of in a skirmish fight, Umbar are very, very good. As well as the Naran Aru Guard, which is where our Farazon is going to be hanging out. Abrazani Nadu Tariq, again without the armour upgrade, they have AP. Stats otherwise not quite so good. You definitely want to be sending them into their intended target, which is armoured units. If you send them into a fight against some of Linden's units, for example, in this fight, they will not be very effective at all, or at least not cost efficient. And then back here, we've got some Casimir's Legion as well. And then finally, towards the rear of the settlement, near the beacons, we have Rune, played by Zelhain. He's got a catapult over here, which he's a little bit far away, but potentially some attacking artillery will be very useful as the battle goes on. Some more AP in the Gamprim, so a lot of AP on display from the attackers here, which won't bother Linden, but it could be a bit of a problem for Dol Amroth and Khazad-dûm. Some Eastron clansmen with the armour upgrade, both levels of armour upgrade at that. Flagrim, obviously more AP. He's got some Gamprim back there as well as some more Eastron clansmen. He's actually got some Narum over here as well, so he's actually gone for a little bit more quality in terms of his archers. He didn't bring the Eastron hunters. He's just gone for some crossbowmen and some Narum, which is a little bit more of an investment, but I suppose based on his army composition he could afford to make that. He's got some Scion Rim as well, which are good quality spears, but not AP. And then finally back here, his final unit, obviously, his general, going to be hanging out in the Carmel's Chosen, multiple HP sword and board unit. So, let's go through the defending compositions. We have Thick Dick, who is playing as Dol Amroth. He's got some Doran Ernil archers. I'll be interested to see how the skirmish fight goes, because the attacks have definitely brought all the right tools to be a real pain for the defenders. I'm actually a little bit surprised not to see much cavalry. Dol Amroth in particular are not exactly well thought of in the current patch. One area where they can be effective in this sort of situation is where they're heavily armoured lance cavalry. Some Tarnostian Guard as well, which are basically just Gondorian spears, but a little bit worse. We've got some Doran Ernil pikes as well. Pikes in general could be very useful to help hold back the tide, especially when you combine them with some of the more highly skillful Elven units, like this Harlinden infantry, Son of the Dunedain, playing as Linden. Some Harlinden infantry back here as well. Some more Tarnostian Guards, some more Doran Ernil pikes as well. So it certainly isn't surprising to see a lot of these sort of more basic Dol Amroth units, just so the defenders have got more numbers to deal with the armies that are approaching them. Some more Tarnostian Guards, some more Harlinden infantry, and then back here, well, over there you can see some Forlinden archers also, with some Harlinden infantry. Some Tirithea Wardens as well. Now, the Tirithea Wardens, of course, certainly significantly better than the Tarnostian Guard, but also fairly expensive, a little bit too expensive for what they offer currently in the current patch, in my opinion, but they're still decent quality nonetheless. Some 3rd Legion with the armour upgrade, some more 3rd Legion with the armour upgrade, some 4th Legion with the armour upgrade also, some pikes. Obviously a lot of units are all compacted together here, so it's just going to be a sort of rough overview. So a lot of 4th and 3rd Legion, as well as some Tirith units from Dol Amroth, both marksmen and spears, some standard Doran Ernil archers, some 2nd Legion, again with the armour upgrades of Khazad-dûm investing a lot in their infantry, as you would very much expect in this situation. Some Dol Amroth javelins there in the Belfalas Marines, the Blackroot Vale archers, the Forlinden archers. Dol Amroth has invested in a trebuchet, which, considering the rune catapult is so far away, could get some decent pot shots on Umbar as they approach. Some Khazad-dûm reclaimers over here, as well as some Nimrodel rangers, the 1st Legion pikes. And as we get back here, we can see the Wardens of Elos Tyrian, the Linden javelins, as well as some Noldorin Guard and Mithlon Swordmasters, and then obviously the strongest of the Dwarven units, Legion Bodyguard, Mithril Guard, Guards of Khazad-dûm, alongside the Talon Knights from Dol Amroth, the Noldorin Blade Masters from Linden, and some Haven Guard, as well as some more Mithlon Swordmasters. So, a little bit of a quick overview there of the defenders, but then it is a little bit difficult to sort of distinctly see their armies, but even so, strong defence, I think. Tough to break down, but the attackers do have the tools to do it, so let's begin. The trebuchet just waiting for the time being. Now the trebuchet, of course, if it waits, the danger would be that the runic catapult gets into range and immediately snipes it out, which if the attackers can do that, that'll be a big boon for them, because the trebuchet is so expensive and the defenders really can't afford to not be cost effective with such an expensive unit. But if the trebuchet waits for a nice blob to appear down here, that can be when it's so effective. Obviously the radius of damage that a trebuchet has is bigger than a catapult's. Well, you can see obviously Froggy moving forward with all of his rams initially, and this is exactly the sort of you can see that the attackers are quite spread out and a little bit disjointed in how they're moving forward, and this is exactly the sort of area where some offensive cavalry would have come in really, really helpful. Of course, cavalry is a risk, even on a map like this where the defenders would be able to more freely use some cavalry outside the walls. It would still have been a risk, so I can certainly understand not bringing it, but even so, I feel as though with the options that Linden and Dol Amroth have for cavalry, it definitely would have been an option that they could have considered. The trebuchet, meanwhile, starting to open up on Umbar, although Umbar's all in loose formation, so I don't know how effective this is going to be. They could get some pot shots scored on the Casimir's Legion, which wouldn't be terrible, but the trebuchet is such an expensive unit that you definitely need to make the most of its ammunition. Meanwhile, these Doran Ernil archers, I think, taking some point-blank fire from the Corsair archers who have moved forward, and Umbar in particular, more so than their allies, have invested very heavily into their skirmish line, and this is exactly the reason it's going to be very difficult for the defenders to cost-effectively deal with these archer units unless they focus them down individually with everything they've got. And I don't think the defenders will go for that. I think they'll want to be a little bit more conservative based on their compositions, certainly. I would say probably going to be a little bit more conservative just in general. You can see here as well that Froggy is also joining in this, the Dunman Hunters, so already the attackers using their cheaper archers to inflict some pressure on the defenders here, squeezing them in, especially with how many targets they have to go for here. I mean, you can see here that Froggy is going for these Doran Ernil pikemen. Very good choice. They don't have the armour upgrade either, and the more they cut down on the defenders' numbers, the more likely it is that as the battle goes on, the superior numbers of the attackers will slowly but surely overwhelm the defenders. We'll see though. I mean, Khazad-dûm and Linden in general, probably the two strongest factions in the meta at the moment, for different reasons, but in this sort of situation they're both very, very powerful. We'll see if the attackers have got what it takes to wear them down. Easier said than done. Look at all those arrows flying overhead. Definitely a unified front here from the attackers. There was a small window of opportunity where attacking cavalry could have done a lot of damage, but as time has gone on, that has changed. A lot of these arrows are missing their mark, to be fair. You know, not exactly the easiest shot for a lot of these lower quality arrows. And if the defenders can tank all of this damage, remember, a lot of these low quality evil men archers are not going to be up to much in melee. Our infantry moving in, you can see that already the defensive lines getting ready. Over here you can see Dol Amroth just pulling back a little bit, and that is, I'm actually a little bit surprised that they set up a defensive line here in full view of Umbar's skirmishes. More and more gaps appearing in EDORAS' walls. Umbar are now also going to be doing this. And this, I think, is why you don't often see like a defense of the outer walls on EDORAS, because it is so difficult. So people will often pull back to the first sort of bank of choke points here, as the defenders have done. These Doranono archers taking some damage, but the Corsair archers obviously very, very cost effectively munching their way through. Rune going to make their way around this way. Probably going to follow Isengard in, which is probably a wise call. That's the Trebuchet, and they're going for Isengard. Isengard a little bit more compact than Umbar. They're not. Some of their units are not in loose, as we can see over here. They just got a decent hit there on the Uruk-hai pikemen.
Ram has done its work.
Good observation there from the Dol Amroth player to go for the army which is least spread out. As Umbar now, this is obviously going to be a little bit of a thing while the attackers break down as many of these palisades as they can. Ooh. Froggy is also making his way inside. Dunman Hunters are over here, and they are still firing into this little defensive line over here, which actually they need to be careful, because this street over here is the sort of area which can be cut off if Isengard move in here and take this area. Obviously they're not going to be able to advance through Umbar and Rudaur. We'll see though. Trebuchet still bombarding. Isengard there, now starting to make some holes of their own. Although I don't think the attackers need to concern themselves with making too many gaps, because it doesn't look as though the defenders are going to be contesting the outer palisades anyway. Nor should they at this point. They've already made their choice to pull back from there. More gaps, more arrows flying overhead. Still from Froggy's Dunman Hunters, obviously certainly not the highest quality archers. But not only are they going to be dealing some chip damage, but they are also going to be coaxing some of the defensive archers into using their ammunition on Dunman Hunters, which much better to see them use their ammunition now than later, when some stuff like the Trollshaw Axe Throwers and Eastron Crossbows are coming forward, which in most situations are going to do horrendously under arrow fire, especially in a situation like this where there are so many Elven archers around. So if the attackers can utilise their lower quality skirmishers, they're in a pretty good place here. Corsair Savages moving forwards. This is still not exactly the most appealing of advances. You can see the Corsair Savages fairly cheap. I believe 425 or 400 florins. There or thereabouts is what they cost. Meanwhile up here, there goes a gate. They would actually get a decent damage off the charge on some stuff like the Tarnostian Guard, but they would not enjoy going up against Linden's infantry at all. And Linden in general, with the attackers' focus a little bit more AP orientated, Linden's infantry you would imagine are probably going to do quite well for themselves as the fight goes on, especially when things start to get a little bit more of a melee focus to them. You can see here that Rudaur moving in. Rudaur are going to be distributing their aid where necessary, which is going to come in the shape of Rudaur, just sort of basic Rudaur swordsmen. Numbers, more so than anything. Sort of a bit of a cagey period so far. Once again, the Trebuchet trying to go for Isengard. Isengard, they do, well actually no, they go for Rudaur's swordsman. It would be a nice hit if they got a direct hit, but obviously the Trebuchet is so wildly inaccurate. There are all kinds of Khazad-dûm over here who are firing back to the attackers, but the Uruk-hai archers are also over here. And it is a pure skirmish fight, and the Orkhans of Khazad-dûm very good in terms of damage. Not so great at actually receiving arrow fire. That was a nice hit there on the Rudauer Swordsman, but really they are the, as I've said before, the sort of the one exception in the Dwarven roster. Most of them are so resilient and have got really high armor values. The Orc Hunter's a little bit of an exception there, at least in comparison to the rest of the roster. Still getting some hits on those Rudauer Swordsmen. Uruk-hai Pikemen finding themselves the target of some arrows now. What have we here? Rudauer Swordsmen getting ready to move forwards. Although still, the Narina Iron Royal Guard have come forward. Now that's interesting. Because that is the sort of unit that, despite the fact they've got multiple HP, a shield value, good armour, that is still the sort of unit that you would imagine the defenders will probably see as too good of a target to pass up, especially if they can kill off our Pharazôn. Because that morale debuff to all of the Corsair units that they've sent up first could be a bit of a problem. But this is a very thick defensive line, obviously, with the Tarnostian Guard and the Doran Ernil Pikemen, the Harlingen Infantry providing some skill in there as well. Obviously charging uphill can be a little bit difficult as well. The Corsair Savages already taken a beating, and there's also Corsair Archers, which, again, they're just being committed forward presumably because they're out of ammunition, so just being sent forward as fodder. I'm actually very surprised that the Narina Aru are coming forward. But Umbar sort of taking on the initial exertions with their low quality Corsairs. Rudauer offering a little bit of support here and there with their Rudauer Swordsman. Our Pharazôn has put himself right in harm's way though, so that will be interesting to behold. Umbar in general, a little bit less in terms of melee power in this fight as well, purely because they brought so many skirmishers. But now you can see the attackers, the decision was made to advance a little bit more in unison here. Rudauer, Umbar and Isengard committing forward men into melee. Half-Orc Spearguard, however, are not going to be a match for armour-upgraded 4th Legion Shield Guard. There are some Uruk-hai Raiders coming forward as well, and actually these dwarves could find themselves a little bit out of position if Isengard pushes forward really aggressively. You can see that Rune's infantry is also starting to arrive over here, and they could open up some gaps of their own. There's still arrows just flying all over the place. As well, it's going to be impossible to keep track of all the skirmishes in this fight in particular. Froggy sending forward some Trollshaw Axe throwers, sneaking in under the radar, and they could do some nasty damage here to these banks of Dwarven Legion. What have we over here? Combined force of Savages, Rudauer Swordsmen, with the support of those archers up on the hill, shooting into the flank of this force over here, and with the backup of some Elven infantry, this primarily Dol Amroth line should hold. Both of them, in fact. The combination of Tarnostian Guard and Doran Ernil Pikemen might not be the most glamorous front line in the world, but against the opposition they're up against here, they'll be just fine. Rune now also doing some damage to Edoras' outer walls. The Narina Aru not in melee, which is good to see, because I thought they were just being pushed up almost immediately. The engagements have started over here, but I can't help but feel as though the real focus is on the other side, purely because Umbar seem to be taking on the bulk of responsibilities over here with their lower amount of melee infantry. They're probably just keeping all these units occupied, and over here would appear to be where a little bit more, and there you can see here the 3rd Legion have already taken an absolute mauling at the hands of the Trollshaw Axe throwers. So that's good to see. Over here as well, the dwarves are pushing Isengard back down the hill, and that's none too surprising. They do have some Snaga skirmishers, which, you know, those javelins might not be of the highest quality, but it's still AP damage filtering into those dwarven lines. Rune are also getting ready to move in themselves, by the looks of things. But having said that, in terms of a melee fight, Isengard is so thoroughly outclassed here. Khazad-dûm's infantry is so strong, the 4th Legion, a real basis for that. I think they're the only spearmen that I know of that doesn't have to deal with the spear malice. There might be a couple of others. But they are the sort of main example of that. Orc Hunters are here as well as some Forlinden Archers. So yeah, Uruk-hai Raiders, not really quality focused, definitely in terms of Isengard's infantry. If you want more numbers, you'll bring them, but this is the sort of fight which, you know, definitely Isengard are going to be hoping that their ranged units are going to be doing getting the cost efficiency off here. And it's going to be very similar over here. Still Rune making more and more holes in the wall. Even more so the case over here. The Dunlending clansmen obviously militia spears. The Tirithea Wardens, I believe, do have the spear malice attributed to them, but even so, you know, it's going to be a relatively simple task for them to hold against just one unit of Dunlending clansmen. The Snaga are over here as well, though, and once again they're going after the Dwarven infantry, so a lot of these javelins and throwing axes finding their mark among the Dwarven infantry, which is exactly what the attackers want. Over here, where the 3rd Legion took their beating, the Dwarves are now moving forwards. The Franadine Berserkers are already come forwards as well, and they are also loosing more into the 3rd Legion. But also the Franadine Berserkers are finding themselves the target of some arrow fire as well, but I feel as though after taking that damage, the Dwarven player really did not want to just sit here and take ranged fire anymore, so he sent his 3rd Legion forwards, and they should be able to... They'll mulch their way through a lot of these, but with the support of the Franadine Berserkers, that solitary unit of 3rd Legion is unlikely to be up to much. Some Rudauer clansmen have come forward now as well. If you look over here, not making a great deal of progress on this front line, but the Rudauer reinforcements to this one might be causing Dol Amroth and the Elves to sweat over here. As soon as this road is bypassed, they'll then be able to charge in over here as well and start to wrap up this defensive line as well, which could be the way to go. Go down this road, follow it all the way around, sort of tying up all of these individual dwarf front lines, allowing Rune and Isengard a little bit more of an easier advance. These 3rd Legion, however, still pushing through, but now the Franadine Berserkers are in melee, and obviously with their AP and just their high stats in general, they're a good unit, and with the support of all of these Rudauer units around them, you would imagine this is going to be the end of the 3rd Legion. They're a very strong unit, but numbers-wise and just the kind of damage they're taking here, probably not ideal for them. Some Trollshaw axe throwers moving in over here. They may very well have used up all their ammunition as well, so they're just moving in to try and reinforce this front line, which is now actually primarily a Rudauer one. So Isengard just hanging back a little bit, all of their units a little bit scattered. Now one important thing for the attackers to bear in mind here is that they are going to need to follow the example of Rudauer here. They are going to need to commit forward their men. There can't really be a lot of conservative play here. The die has been cast already in this fight, I believe, that the attackers need to be aggressive. Their skirmishes have definitely done the job they've needed to so far, though. Some Uruk-hai infantry here on the front line now backing up the Dunlending clansmen. Uruk-hai infantry maybe a little bit more of a problem for the Tirithea Wardens, but with all of this Dwarven reinforcements, or all of these Dwarven reinforcements, I should say, the defensive lines are unlikely to just be bowled over by a single unit of infantry such as this. That is a big blob over here. Rudauer have definitely committed themselves to individual portions. What have we over here? This fight over here is still pretty static, honestly. The Harlinden infantry in particular going to be a little bit difficult for Rudauer to punch their way through with just basic spears and swordsmen, but there is another unit of Rudauer swordsmen on the way forwards now. And there is still these Trollshaw axe throwers over here, which could throw their payload into the side of this line over here. Looks as though they've taken a real savaging at the hands of the defensive skirmishers, though. But they are trying to whittle down this line over here. Here come some Balagai halberds. Again, I feel as though Rudauer have been a lot more all-in than their allies. Their allies have been a little bit more cautious. We'll see if that ends up paying off for them in the end. We've got some runic units on the inside now, and the Flag Rim, their AP will really help them against the Dwarves. Adding that to the Franadine Berserkers, but you can see the 3rd Legion, even though they're in such a difficult position, they are still very difficult to take down. And the 2nd Legion are now coming in to reinforce. They're actually reinforcements heading all over, so they really want to keep this front line as well. Some Dora and Ernil archers getting up here. Some Umbar Balagai halberds now coming over to try and help against this force over here. Some Dora and Ernil pikes moving forward to try and help the Dwarven force that pushed forwards, but I'm not sure whether that's altogether worth it. It's good to see Rune's units now getting onto the front line, however, but Rudauer are going to need some help. Rudauer have been aggressive on multiple fronts, but against defensive lines that include Dwarven and Linden units, that's always going to be difficult. And a lot of the time they're going up against sort of Dol Amroth pikemen as well. You can see some Uruk-hai infantry moving forward, as well as some Uruk-hai pikemen and some runic units, so a little bit more of a genuine committal over here. There is a lot of arrows still flying in, however. These Orc Hunters shooting the attackers here as they come forward at point blank range. Still an entirely Isengard force over here, and now there's some Uruk-hai pikemen on the front line, but again, this isn't going too well for Isengard over here. They need a little bit more, I think. There are these Uruk-hai archers. Again, there's a lot of just units scattered all over the place out there from the attackers. Get a dwarf eye look at this. As the Orc Hunters, there are more javelins coming in. Those Snaga have probably been Isengard's MVPs thus far with how they've been able to get in position, and well, that was a nice hit. And this is exactly what the trebuchet is going to be good for. I did say that at the start of the fight, if blobs appear like this, it's like crack to a trebuchet. They're going to go for it. And that's going to be a lot of damage, and obviously then there could be a lot of breaking as well. We shall see though. Well, back over here. There's been really no progress on this front line here. The Tarnostian Guard have been taking casualties, but not nearly at the sort of pace that the attackers need. And there's some AP units on the front line as well. Nadu Tariq and Balagaya Halberds, and that's still not sufficient. There's some Nadu Bawib over here. You can see that Umbar's skirmish heavy approach is probably coming back to bite them a little bit here. Because slowly but surely they are running out. There's also crossbow corsairs that they brought as well. Now that was unfortunate for the defenders, because that was a... Actually, was that the defenders or was that the attackers? Where be the catapult? I have no idea. Am I blind? I might be blind. But honestly, the runic catapult at this point could be the key. The defenders have blobbed up a little bit on these outer defences as well, committed a lot of their resources to holding these initial roads, which I commend them for actually. A lot of the time the defenders will immediately pull back to this area at the top of the hill here, where the old map is, the structure of the old map still exists, and to this final stand area over here. But here the defenders have set the table. They definitely want to defend these outer positions, which for the time being has served them pretty well. But obviously as time goes on, we'll see how the attrition treats them. Dwarves still holding the line against these Uruk-hai. The Snaga are now in melee, not that the Dwarves will be too bothered about that. Over here, honestly, is where the attackers have had the most joy. The other unit of Franadine Berserkers are coming forward now as well, doing a lot of damage to that unit of 4th Legion. But yeah, the combination of Flagrim, Franadine Berserkers and Rudar Swordsmen over here was too much for the outnumbered Dwarves. And this is where the attackers can make a breakthrough here. They will then be able to attack this front line over here from behind, and they will be able to attack that front line over there from behind. So an important step that towards recovery for the attackers, as the Dol Amroth Trebuchet destroys more of the houses within the settlement. Still some Rudar Swordsmen in reserve. There's still the Naruna Aru Royal Guard. Still arrows just flying all over the place from everyone who has archers within the settlement. Ah, there's the runic catapult. I was blind. And they are now bombarding this rear defensive position. Good hit there on the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers. But it would definitely be worth their time switching to normal shot and trying to snipe the Trebuchet out. Trebuchet is such a menace. But there's a lot of good targets they could go for back here, even if they do miss the Trebuchet, of course. They could end up hitting some 1st Legion. The Mithlon Swordmass is a very nice hit there, slicing through that unit. There's a lot of good targets for the catapult up here, Noldorin Guard as well. Ones of Elos Tyrian are now in position, laying down some AP fire, and they're going for the area where the attackers are starting to make a bit of a breakthrough. And you can see already that this has had a pretty catastrophic effect on the attackers. They're looking a lot less durable now. So likely to be a Pyrrhic victory, if anything, for the attackers on that front. This Dwarven front line still doing work. The 4th Legion again showing why they're so strong. The lack of that spear malice is such a big thing for them. It essentially allows them to act as line infantry while having the increased mass of spears and of course the shield wall of spears. Khazad-dûm in general have got access to that shield wall a lot more so than a lot of other factions, and in this sort of situation it makes them doubly strong. Obviously they're being looked at for the next patch, because as it stands they are of course maybe a little bit too powerful. But for this situation I think it's fine. The defenders are outnumbered, so Linden and Khazad-dûm is not as much of a problem as it would be with equal numbers. Meanwhile, the only unit left fighting over here, the Runic Eastron Clansmen, as the Uruk-hai start fleeing for the hills. You can see now the Snaga are moving forward. Not exactly the reinforcements they were hoping for, I'm sure, but the addition of the 2nd Legion in here, the damage that they can dish out is really very, very impressive. Here comes another unit of Eastron Clansmen as well as some Scion Rim. Again, I believe this is really just going to be a stopgap to keep these units occupied. The attacks are going to need to make a breakthrough elsewhere, and I still think it's going to have to be here. You can see some Rudar clans moving forward, trying to push through. It's not often the dwarves get pushed through. Ah, hello. Finally over here the lack of reinforcements did tell. So the attackers are going to be able to move through here despite fairly hefty cost. Balagai Halberds and Nadu Tariq moving forward, so the Umbar reinforcements as they moved into this Athman proving to be pretty important there. On this front line we now can see some Castamir's Legion as well. There's still a long way to go from this road though if they're going to make it to the summit of EDORAS. There's a lot of golden boys over here. Don't be fooled though. All that glitters ain't gold, as most of these are Eastron Clansmen. There are some Scion Rim in here as well. But this is definitely a numbers game here for the attackers. They're trying to push their way through, which the defenders absolutely cannot allow. Oof, bit of friendly fire there. But obviously we've seen time and time again in this sort of situation, the attackers can push through with their sheer numbers. And as soon as the defenders lose their defensive lines, the numbers discrepancy starts to become a big problem. It might already be a problem, honestly, because now they are going to start to wrap up the line going down this road over here. They already surrounded this dwarven front line, which was doing so well initially, holding off the Uruk-hai, but now they're being attacked in the rear by Loka Flag Rim as well. With the addition of that AP, with the fact that they're being attacked in the rear and the penalties that that imbues, no bueno for them. Attackers, meanwhile, starting to make some genuine progress at this point. We're more or less a little bit past it, but we are at the halfway point, and as we can see, the defenders have actually taken a little bit more in terms of total losses, but they also still have a lot of their elites, a lot of their really dangerous stuff waiting in the wings. Forlinder Marines doing a lot of damage as they move forward as well. Got to remember as well that the attackers did go for a little bit more of a skirmish heavy approach, which could come back to bite them in the end. They might not be able to get over the line with skirmishes that are out of ammunition. Nadu Tariq attacking the Tarnostian Guard. Numbers, I think, are going to be the problem for this Umbar assault, though. They're going to need a little bit more to break through this shield wall. As soon as they do, the AP damage should carry them across the line. These dwarves fighting back to back, the 4th Legion and the 3rd Legion in there. But ultimately overwhelmed. No hope for them. They can only hope to stall the attackers for as long as possible, allowing the Elven Javelins to do their work. Looks like the Forlinder Marines are charging into melee, actually. The Noldoran Guard just waiting in behind. Over here, though, this defensive line's still holding firm, and again, that's because a lot of this is still just basic militia units, as well as Scion Rim, which... Scion Rim are decent, but they're still spears. Infantry killing at speed is not really their MO. The Gamp Rim would be able to do a decent job, if not for the fact that those Nimrod L Rangers have positioned themselves just so that the body piercing is going to inflict a pretty heavy toll. What's going on back here? This front line fight's still continuing. The Castamir's Legion. Now you can see the Tarnostian Guard have finally been gotten rid of. There's some Doran Ernil units, Blackroot Vale Archers. You can see now that a lot of these units that are left are not exactly of the highest quality. The Belfalas Marines are over here throwing their javelins into the Castamir's Legion, but oof. It's now getting to the point where this front line is also looking a little bit suspect and a little bit ropey. That Runic Caspar, I think it should still have ammunition. It didn't fire all that many. Narim getting into position. You can see that they still have some scattered units in the backfield. Hello. Forlinder Marines getting into position. Some Flagrim heading towards the front line as well, but this has been a really punishing route of attack for the attackers here. The Javelins, the Archers, the really solidly constructed defensive line based around the Dol Amroth spears, and then the damage of the Linden and Khazad-dûm units around them. It's been difficult for the attackers over here, and the Trebuchet still has ammunition, and that is absolutely brutal. They probably got some friendly fire there, the few remaining dwarves, but it was definitely going to be worth it just to rout off some Snaga and to kill off more infantry, try to equalise the numbers a little bit. Those Uruk-hai crossbows are in position now, though, which Again, it can be quite difficult to keep track of all of these dangerous units in a siege like this, but the defenders do need to take note of these crossbows, both from Isengard and Rune. Here we can see some Ranadine Berserkers moving forward as well, going to be adding their damage to the mix. Another defensive line has formed, however, so the defenders have managed to sort of stem the bleeding a little bit. They're not letting the attackers get up to the top yet. One of the trebuchets is down, but the catapult really, again, like, if you're trying to snipe out artillery, you should always turn flaming shot off. It makes the catapults much more accurate, especially with bigger targets like the trebuchets, makes it much easier to hit them. And trebuchet is definitely something the attackers want to get rid of very quickly if they can help it. Wow, what's going on this front line? You can still see the Nadu Tyrant. They're actually wavering. And the Abrazani have got decent morale as well. Don't think the catapult is actually going for the trebuchet, actually looking at that fire trajectory they've got going on there. We've got some First Legion moving in now, so the defenders are serious about holding these outer positions. They really want the... they don't want this to turn into a one choke point fight, and I can see why, honestly. Because if it's just the one choke point, the attackers have got a much easier... It's much easier for them to then use their sort of higher tier javelins and crossbows that they have brought. Axlers, I should say. Though to be fair, I think Rudar have used most of that already. Yeah, this front line over here. Hello. Another good hit from the trebuchet there. This front line is still holding. They have the Balchor Sapphire Bladesmen. It's not the sort of unit you see an awful lot of, which is a shame, because I think they're pretty good. In my opinion, they're actually less of a risk to bring these guys than the Dragon's Wrath crossbows, which are infuriating when they refuse to fire. Some Narvrim. The Uruk-hai crossbows getting into position over here as well, desperate to try and thin the ranks of the defenders over here. They've committed so much to trying to break this down, and still very limited progress. That was a brutal shot from the trebuchet once more. And obviously this is the good thing about a trebuchet. Look at all that routing. Absolutely brutal. Vicious even. Carmel's Shadow Guard from Rune moving forward now as well. There's a few crispy... piles of crispy corpses there, caused by the catapult, but certainly not as effective as the trebuchet has been in this fight. And now this attack over here is starting to run out of steam as well. And these evil men trying to do their best. Castamir's Legion from Eclipse 2500 being committed forward. Very, very good unit, but pushing their way through all this is very difficult. The Khazad-dûm Reclaimers are here as well. Again, they're a very strong unit indeed. Going for the Castamir's Legion. The Castamir's Legion in full view of the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, and they're going to pay dearly for that. Already, I think the attackers are probably going to be... This will probably be the sort of point in the battle where the attackers will probably start to sweat a little bit. Starting to think that, you know, they're not really making progress at the rate they would probably want. And also, there's still the fact that the defenders still have their elites. When it comes to Khazad-dûm and Linden, and Dol Amroth with stuff like the Haven Guard, that's quite a scary proposition. Narvrim firing into the 4 Linden Marines and the Noldering Guard, doing their best to try and thin out the defending skirmish power. The First Legion actually, their formation not exactly in the best of conditions. That should probably stabilise though as soon as the that was some friendly fire from the trebuchet actually. That is the danger with the trebuchet. You can certainly hit your own men in a blob with how inaccurate it is. The Shadow Guard are on the front line as well, and that AP damage will certainly not go amiss. From an attacking perspective, Carmel's chosen over there as well. There's some Rudar clansmen. Oh, look at that. Those Castamir's Legion were absolutely dumpstered by the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers. Crossbow Corsairs now getting into position though. Might be a little bit too late, and obviously they have to be advanced right into the jaws of all of those defensive archers. The Nimrodel Rangers immediately targeting them. The Harlinden Guard also as well. The Crossbow Corsairs are so vulnerable to this sort of thing. I know crossbows in general are going to be targeted by all sorts of archers in this sort of situation, but the Crossbow Corsairs especially, not good at mitigating that damage. Still the attackers trying to push up this road. Some Uruk-hai crossbows on the front line that are out of ammunition. The Shadow Guard are here as well. But the 1st Legion holding down the fort. They're going to receive some backup here from some falling Marines, although they took a fair amount of damage there on the approach from some archers. Pyrannodine Rangers now here. And that body piercing will be good, especially against, the Noldering Guard trying to bring them down. They missed the Pyrannodine Rangers there with that trebuchet shot, but they opened up another hole in their walls. Not that that really matters at this point. But the attackers starting to use their own body-piercing projectiles, which against something like the 1st Legion might be necessary here, because I don't really see how the attackers are going to force their way through the 1st Legion with brute force. Some more pikes of their own moving forward, but it's still an uphill fight for the attackers here. And still this front line is holding, although at this point you're starting to notice there's a lot less Elven and Dwarven units on the front line. Belfalas Marines have been sent forward to try and hold down the fort, but it's possible that the attrition is finally starting to pay in the attackers' favour over here. Meanwhile, over here actually, the defenders are starting to turn the tables on the attackers a little bit. Umbar have been sort of left to try and hold down the fort by their lonesome at this point in time. They've got a unit of Casimir's Legion Council. I'm a little bit surprised actually that the defenders have not decided to take their elites and go down this road themselves, because there's certainly no intention from the attackers to attack up this route, and at this point there's not a lot Umbar could honestly do to stop an attack from the side, from the rear over here, especially with elites like Noldering Guard and Blade Masters would absolutely carve through what's left of Umbar at this point. And that would be also the sort of thing where you could go after the catapult. Carmel's Chosen moving over here as well. The catapult trying to get some good hits over here to try and allow Umbar some semblance of a victory. The rest of Rudar's forces that were over here also being committed forward. The Witch Realm Enslavers, more Rudar clansmen as well. The Enslavers will be good just because of the damage, as well as the Carmel's Chosen, but I think it's last call for this attack over here. They are, this is sort of the last stand for the attackers on this side of the settlement. They're going to have to sort of use what they've got left, and to be fair, there's not a lot of defenders left over here now either. The defenders have sort of moved back up to the summit here to try and hold up. Mithlon Marines over here. The defenders can't afford to retreat from the summit though, because they've still got so many units holding the line down here, successfully as well. Now the addition of that Noldering Guard certainly made life a little bit more tricky over here. But as time goes on, it is looking more and more as though the numbers of the attacks is starting to have more of a negative impact on the defenders. Legion Bodyguard are coming down here, as well as some Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, however, so the defenders, they're not thinking about retreating to the Golden Hall, which at this point is maybe a little bit surprising even. Going after the Lurtz hunting pack with the Trebuchet at this point. The Trebuchet certainly has proven to be a worthwhile addition. I feel as though that has more to do with the fact that the attackers have failed to snipe it out with their catapult more than anything else. But, Thick Dick has definitely targeted the right things with the Trebuchet. Uruk-hai crossbows still trying to do damage to this front line. Uruk-hai infantry are over here as well. But with these Dwarven elites, I'm not sure that this is going to go in their favour even still. More arrow fire as well, raining down on the attacks as they move forward. Baltroth Sapphire Bladesmen are now getting into a position where they can throw their javelins. And obviously as higher tier javelins, they are going to do a lot of damage against some of these heavily armoured units. I mean, I'm interested to see how this attack over here goes. There's really just some Tirithea Marksmen and Nimrodel Rangers holding the line. Actually some 1st Legion Pikes from King Ammar moving down as well. Some skirmishes that are out of ammunition. So at this point it's the defenders' turn to just sort of send a token force to try and stop the advance of these units, because with those Witch Realm Enslavers on the front line, you're going to need to send forward something of genuine substance. The 1st Legion are that, but you can see Froggy is trying to get his Witch Realm Enslavers into a position where he can attack these pikes from the side. And that the 1st Legion pikes will not appreciate at all. The high AP damage from the Enslavers going to do damage there. Ooh, some javelins there. The Mithlon Marines getting into a good position. We sort of head towards the final 10,000 frames. Still, it's Still a few of these choke points which have been holding for a long time. I'm not sure the attackers have got what it takes to actually push through here. I mean, they've still got some Uruk-hai Berserkers and the Lance Hunting Factories. Honestly, I think they might need to think about committing. Because this attack over here is looking like it could collapse. The addition of those Legion Bodyguard and the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers have once again turned this fight to be in the favour of the defenders. Over here, though, taking some rear shots from, I think, Balchor Sapphire Bladesmen are actually... No, they're just going point blank. Something else was hitting them. But it's really just Uruk-hai Pikes over here at this point, and obviously First Legion Pikes are stronger than them. The backup of the Noldorin Guard will certainly help. It's still going to be a relatively Pyrrhic victory for whoever wins over here, though. Which the defenders will probably be more happy to accept than the attackers at this point, because the attackers need an in. They need some way to get up here. Oh, hello. And yes, we are now seeing a flanking manoeuvre. It is only one unit from Son of the Dunedain, a singular unit of Harland's infantry. Could be going after the Thranodine Rangers here, or... I mean, honestly, I would go for the Thranodine Rangers. If they try and surround the attacking units up here, they're just going to get caught by the Carmel's Chosen. Or they could be going for the Catapult. Where is the Catapult? There's only 2 of them left, so the Catapult's already toast. Yeah, things are looking fairly rosy for the defenders here, I would say. And actually you can see that by the fact that the defenders, emboldened, are now moving into a bit more of an offensive stance. You can see both units of Talon Knights are now moving forward, as well as the Meteor Guard, so more of the elites that they were keeping at the back in the town centre next to the Golden Hall are now being committed forwards to try and deal with these interlopers that are fouling up their town. Defeat seems certain for these Uruk-hai. Yeah, they're running out of steam over here. The Balchor Sapphire Bladesmen are strong in melee, but I don't know, I don't think alone they're going to be able to do much. Rotting Meat will actually kill individual unit models on a direct hit, which is amusing, but for the most part, obviously, it's just something to throw when you're out of regular ammunition. Mythlon Marines heading down to the front lines as well. Both units of Mythlon Marines, actually. And while things were looking initially fairly promising over here, the Witch Realm Enslavers are going to find themselves pretty outclassed at this point, now that Meteor Guard and Talon Knights are going to be joining forces on the front line over here. Here you can see, meanwhile, the Harland infantry went up here, and it did get caught by the Carmel's Chosen. Yeah, well, we are now within the final 10,000 frames, and yeah, the attackers struggling to gain a foothold. Thranodine Rangers still trying to get down some body-piercing damage. Belfalas Marines are now pushing their way into the Balchor Sapphire Bladesmen, who are on the front line on their own at this point. They are going to get some backup from the Uruk-hai Berserkers, but I think it's probably a little bit too late for that to make too much of a difference, if we're being honest. There's Harland and Guard getting some nice hits there on the Harland infantry. They're going for the Nazkai, actually, which again is a good target. The Carmel's Chosen trying to join forces with them. But what remains of Froggy and Eclipse's advance up this road, it's actually quite rare that you see a defence of EDORAS where the attackers fail to make it up this road at all. And I feel as though that does have a lot to do with the fact that the defenders decided to... They didn't retreat in this fight, which is potentially quite risky, because the attackers, when they have numbers like this, can potentially sort of push their way through your lines. In this situation that didn't happen, however. And now you can see the Talon Knights are actually doing that to Rudawa. Getting into their formation, obviously they're going to be able to rip their way through Rudawa clansmen. The Enslavers will be able to do a decent amount of damage to Talon Knights, however. Well, there's some Mythlon Swordmasters loitering with intent over there. I'm actually a little bit surprised they're not charging forward and just finishing off the Rangers at this point, I think. It's curtains for the attackers, to be honest with you. And meanwhile, some Carmel's Chosen adding themselves to the front line. They might actually finally break through here. First Legion Pikes and the Noldorin Guard are finally showing signs that they are looking like being defeated, and with the addition of the Carmel's Chosen, that might be just what they need, but it's a little bit too late. The Nazkai as well, yeah, I mean, the attackers are going to win this fight over here, but it's a little bit too late. You can see as well that there's guards of Khazad-dûm on their way forward, which, you know, no rest for the weary as far as the attackers are concerned. And over here you can see more reinforcements arrived as well. The Talon Knights coming down here. The Uruk-hai Berserkers and the Balchal Sapphire Blazemen, to be fair, will do a hefty amount of damage to the Talon Knights. But it's just, at this point, the attackers don't have enough resources left to really make a go of this. The Lurtz Hunting Pack is still running around, Uruk-hai Crossbows doing their best. The Dwarves are moving forward, the Trebuchet, more Elves. Aha. And now you can see Son of the Doomed Lion has committed units over here. There goes the Catapult Crewman. Littlon Sword Masters doing their thing. Where did the Noldorin Blade Masters go? One player admitted defeat. I don't know who that is. It's not Rune. It might be... yeah, I think it was Eclipse, actually. Some of Froggy's units are still fighting. The Trebuchet trying to get some point-blank hits off, perhaps. There's some Nazkai. I mean, at this point, if you're Isengard, you might as well just commit everything forward. If you put all of your units into one big block, they're going to... it's going to be more difficult for the enemy to just single them out and break them, and you might be able to pad your own kill count a little bit. Guards of Khazad-dûm actually just sort of holding the line on their lonesome here. Eastron Crossbows over here, trying to get into a position where they can fire. Littlon Sword Masters coming forwards. Witch-Ramen Slavers are still alive and actually standing pretty tall. They are the only unit from Rudauers that is still alive from this assault over here, mind you. And they will start to fall away a little bit more rapidly now, but they did okay. What's that? Granadine Rangers, they're still alive as well. But again, individual units of very battered skirmishers are not going to be enough to secure victory. Noldorin Guard are moving forward, the Noldorin Blade Masters, the Haven Guard, so this is going to be the defenders flexing their muscles, sending forward their most elite units. The Trebuchet being pushed through, boxing Isengard in a little bit more. The Nazkai are going to move forward, but it's a little bit... it sucks for the Trebuchet crew. They've done such a good job in this fight, and now their reward is that they get to fight Nazkai. Lurtz Hunting Pack trying to do some damage. With their body piercing, they will certainly be able to do that. The Legion Bodyguard here on the front line. In tandem with the Talon Knights. There goes Rudauer's General. Yeah, you can see the Talon Knights actually, they did pay the price for sort of pushing their way into the lines over here. The Berserkers certainly took a pretty heavy toll on them, but they did their job. Obviously at this point, you know, the defenders knew that they could afford to do that. And now you can see the Haven Guard fighting on the front line side by side with the guards of Khazad-dûm. Two very, very strong units indeed, fighting in tandem. The poor Trebuchet crew have been butchered by the Pikes and the Nazkai. Meanwhile over here, Witch-Ramen Slavers still alive, 13 of them, with their backs to these houses. Obviously it is only a matter of time, certainly. What have we here? Nothing left back here, just a few units of Belfalas Marines moving forward. 5 of them. Here come the Noldorin Blade Masters and the Noldorin Guard charging down this hill. Probably going to go after the Lurtz Hunting Pack. Lurtz Hunting Pack actually shooting right along that line of the Legion Bodyguard. Not killing any of them, but still doing a decent amount of damage. Lurtz is in there, you can see him. Nice ranger unit that Isengard have access to. The Lurtz Hunting Pack are not half bad in melee either, but certainly not strong enough to turn the tide of this battle. I've not seen General Isam before. It's possible that it's just someone who's changed their name from something they used to use previously, but
without their general, they may lose heart and flee.
I feel as though if he is a new player, he's actually conducted himself pretty well here. I feel as though this was more of the fact that the defenders set their defence out very well, and the attackers, I think a bit more coordination was needed from them, particularly considering the armies they picked. We'll go through that when the battle's actually over, but I feel as though there was certainly a way that the attackers could have been, they could have won this, I think, but it wouldn't have made for as enjoyable a watch, I think. But again, we'll go through that at the end. Uruk-hai pikemen doing their best. These trebuchets here at this point are probably going to elongate the fight a little bit, because it's going to make the engagement a little bit awkward. But still, the elves, men and dwarves doing very well for themselves. Still some enslavers over here. Only 3 of them at this point. It might be because the Mithril Guard are not actually engaged with them. Which are enslavers with their wicked-looking tridents. Granadine Rangers still making a nuisance of themselves, so there's still arrows flying in this fight. But no, it's all over. The Lurtz hunting pack have been caught. They and some Nazkai fighting in melee against the Noldorin Guard, some Talon Knights. The Noldorin Blade Masters are over there as well. The Legion Bodyguard are on their way. The Noldorin Blade Masters, I think, are going to try and go around and then hit them from the rear. So how about those Witch Realm enslavers then? Yeah, they're still here. All 3 of them are. And they are now going to bravely engage the Mithril Guard. Naturally, this is going to be a fight that's fairly one-sided, but I don't know what the Lord of the Rings equivalent of Valhalla is, but seeing as Rudauer are the not Vikings, I'd say they've earned their place there. Ah, hello. The Granadine Rangers are also coming in, obviously thoroughly outmatched, but probably just throwing everything forwards at this point. Doing what he can. Let's see what's happening over here. The final throws of this fight, the Uruk-hai pikemen again. It's an awkward engagement with the trebuchets being here, but obviously slowly but surely these pikes would be whittled down. Yeah, now the Noldorin Blade Masters just sort of chasing everything down. The Lurtz hunting pack trying to get away, but now they find themselves caught like a rat in a trap. Noldorin Blade Masters over here, all sorts of stuff over here and here, and the attackers are now boxed in, and they never made it to the top of the hill. I feel as though that's something that the defenders can take great pride in. The fact that the attackers never made it to this point here is rare for EDORAS, and in fact in terms of a replay that I've shown, I don't think I've ever shown a battle in which the attackers didn't at least make it to the top. The defenders have certainly won on EDORAS before, but still, very well played from the defenders, I feel.
Our foe has lost control of the city.
And here the Noldorin Blade Masters. The Noldorin Blade Masters, obviously one of the strongest forces on the battlefield as far as a single unit goes. Very, very powerful. Not a huge amount of armour, but the multiple HP certainly makes up for that, and huge damage and skill values as far as the elves go. The Nazkai here doing their best, but their best... It's rare that the Nazkai's best is not enough, but in this case it's certainly true. And General Isam is actually going to be the final attacker left standing, I believe. Isengard the only one with anything significant left. It's possible there's a few sort of individual runic units. Maybe some Rudauer left alive as well, I believe. Yep, that's it for these units over here. Some strong crossbows running around. Some Harlinden units, some Mithlond. Yeah, here we go. Obviously now the Noldorin Blade Masters are in here, attacking the Nazkai in the rear. And this is going to be the final straight of this fight. And again, Linden and Khazad-dûm probably, you know, again, the community is, obviously no one's opinions. You can't a unified opinion. You know, everyone's going to have different ideas. But to my mind, Khazad-dûm and Linden are the 2 strongest factions in the game at the moment. Again, like I said, for different reasons. Like I feel as though Linden are very easy to play. Khazad-dûm, on the other hand, it's more the fact that their infantry is so strong that aspect of their army sort of pushes them into being sort of like Kazdum are the ones that are sort of thought of being borderline overpowered at this point in time. But having said that, it's still difficult for the defenders in a situation like this because they are outnumbered by an army. A lot of numbers were available to the attackers here. They were all evil factions, which have more men on average anyway, even with equal funds. So I still think the defenders did a very good job here. They used their resources very wisely. Let's go for the end, so we may as well go up to ×2 speed as the Nazkai completely destroyed. And actually, the final units left for the attackers going to be a few units of Uruk-hai pikemen, sandwiched on both sides by the finest that Dol Amroth, Linden and Khazad-dûm have to offer, which certainly not a particularly appealing fight for them to be in. That's going to be it for them. There might well be something else actually in the... Well, there's still the Lurtz hunting pack, but there's only 2 of them. They're probably just going to charge in and get slaughtered immediately. And indeed they are. Noldor Guard. I guess it was unfortunate that the Harland and Guard were the ones that got the initial charge.
Our ally lies dead.
There he goes.
Without their general, they may lose heart and flee.
The end.
Our allies have fled the field like cowards.
Very well played from the defenders there, in my opinion. I don't even think the attackers played too badly. There were certainly some things that I would do differently.
A bitter drop to swallow. Next time it'll be our foe that sups from this most foul cup.
Yeah, and there were certainly things that, from an attacking perspective, I said they probably should have done differently. I feel as though, with the compositions they had brought, I thought that what they were going to do was to take it slow in the beginning and try to use their skirmishes to just play the attrition game early on, try and bleed the defenders of some of their ammunition, try and do what damage you can with your lower quality archers, and then when that is done, you know, maybe use the catapult to snipe out any enemy artillery. Once that was done, then I was going to imagine that they would sort of collapse in with their greater numbers, try and push through. But in the end, I feel as though that wasn't what they did. I feel as though Rudar and Umbar moved forward very, very quickly, which surprised me a little bit. Froggy got the most kills on his team as well, and his composition, I think, was maybe a little bit more geared to being a little bit more aggressive. He had a few less archers, more close-range skirmishes. But yeah, I feel as though maybe if they were going to be that aggressive, they probably should have gone all of them for less skirmishes, more melee units, especially Umbar. I feel as though Umbar's... You can go skirmish heavy with Umbar, but they also have a very strong infantry corps. And if this was going to be the plan all along, I'm a little bit surprised they went for so many archers. Like, I feel as though if this was the plan, they could have gone for just a single unit of crossbow corsairs, kept the corsair archers, but ditched the 2 Abrazanim Nadubawib and gone for some more infantry, whether that was more Castamir's Legion, whether that was even some cheap stuff like corsair pikes and warriors. I feel as though that probably would have been the way to go. Something else I would have brought if I were the attackers to try and improve their chances would be the Isengard Ballista. Particularly in an open settlement like this, the Isengard Ballista can be brutal. And it's definitely a big selling point of their faction in general. In any siege, really, even ones with bigger walls, I would still be very tempted to bring the Isengard Ballista because it's better than a catapult, in my opinion. And as Isengard, you absolutely want to be bringing that. It would have been a very big boon for them to bring. But even so, I think Isengard still did very well for themselves. I think Umbar did the worst, purely because their composition was more skirmish focused, and I think the defenders were definitely prepared to deal with that. Linden with the most kills. All of the attackers were breaking over 2,000 kills, so really the only thing that I would have liked to have seen from the defenders probably would have been a couple of units of cavalry, maybe from Dol Amroth. You know, just a couple of units of lancers, because that would have made the skirmish heavy approach of the attackers, or compositions at least of the attackers, a little bit less comfortable for them. Let's see what did the damage for Froggy. Obviously the Franadine Rangers did okay. In a siege, you often expect Rangers to do a lot better, but by the time the Rangers were deployed, things were already starting to turn sour for the attackers. The Enslavers did well. I mean, considering the fact they were outmatched for a lot of the time they were in melee, they did very well. Berserker's getting a decent amount of kills. The rest of his army, well, the Trollshaw Axlers as well, so you can see obviously the AP projectiles did the business. A lot of his infantry was outclassed. He had to rely on his numbers to do a lot of damage because he was going into some pretty solid defensive positions for Dol Amroth, the dwarves, and the elves. So yeah, very enjoyable actually, and a very well constructed defense, I think, from the defenders. So I'm sure people will actually enjoy watching this. People always like it when the good guys win, especially when it's a defense like this, especially when it was as well played as this as well. I think they deserve quite a lot of credit for more so the compositions. I feel as though the armies were very, very good for the defenders, and they definitely suited this battle very, very well. Good to see EDORAS once again too. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.